Good morning, all the invitees, guests, and today's third special lecture series on catalyzing transformation in higher education and ODL through NEP 2020, organized by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Center for Internal Quality Assurance, SICA, at University campus. It is my proud privilege to welcome today's president of the function and our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor K. Sitaramarao Garu. Kindly come onto the stage and occupy the chair, sir. Also, I welcome the today's chief guest, Dr. Shakila Shamsu Madam, former PhD, New Education Policy, Ministry of Education, Government of India, and Secretary, Erstwhile Committee to draft National Education Policy. Once again, welcome you, Madam. Please come on to the stage and occupy the chair. I also welcome our Academic Director, Professor Pushpa Chakrapani, Madam. Please come on to the stage and occupy the chair. Also, I welcome our Registrar, Dr. Professor A.V.R. Reddy Garu. Kindly come on to the stage, sir. Now, I welcome Dr. K. Sridevi Garu, Director in Charge, Center for Internal Quality Assurance. Kindly come on to the stage and occupy the chair. We recognize in this August gathering different directorates, directors, deans, heads of the branches, and students, research scholars, and other faculty members. Now I request Professor Lakshmi Garu kindly present a flower bouquet to our Vice Chancellor, Professor K. Sitaramarao Garu. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, madam. Now I request Professor Pallavi Kabde kindly present a flower bouquet to today's chief guest, Dr. Shakila Shamsu Madam.
Thank you, sir.
I request Dr. Ramakrishna Garu kindly present a bouquet to our Director Academic, Professor G. Pushpa Chakrapani Madam. I request Dr. Vijay kindly present a bouquet to our Registrar, Dr. A.V.R. Reddy Garu. I request Dr. Samaya Madam kindly present a bouquet to our SICA Director, Dr. Sridevi Garu. Thank you, Madam and sir. Now I request all the dignitaries on the dais kindly proceed for the lighting of the lamp. Thank you, sir. Now I request Professor K. Sitaramarao, Vice Chancellor of the University and President of today's function, kindly conduct the further proceedings, sir. Thank you very much.
Sabhaku namaskaram. Very good morning to you all. We have started a very important lecture series on behalf of our SICA, Center for Internal Quality Assurance. And this special lecture series mainly focuses on the quality aspects of higher education in our institution. So far, we have discussed so many aspects related to quality assurance. This is the third lecture we are conducting. And today, really, we are very fortunate enough to have Madam Dr. Shakila Shamsu, very well-known academician and also very actively and closely involved in the policy formulation at the highest level, that is Government of India. And she was former OSD to Ministry of Education, Government of India, and Secretary erstwhile Committee to drafting of the National Education Policy 2020. This is enough to say she is only the right person to speak on implementation of NEP, especially in our ODL institutions and open universities, and what would be the issues and challenges we face in the process. So, as you know very well, already 3 years have been completed after the launching of this new national education policy. No doubt it is very transformative and lot of potentiality to change the scenario of higher education system in our country. So a lot of discussion has taken place, and some of them have opposed, some of them have in toto adopted and accepted, and some of them are very enthusiastic to implement, but they were struggling to implement properly, and all these things are going on at the present state of situation. In UGC also is very particular to implement this new national education policy, and it has already constituted zonal committees, 5 zonal committees in our country: North, South, East, Central Zone. And the universities falling in these zonals have to work in a coordinated manner to implement this policy. So they have also issued a letter to the vice chancellors saying that there is need for appointment of a nodal officer at the institutional level to coordinate with the zonal committees while expediting the implementation of this national education policy. And not only this, even in the accreditation process also, National NEP is also insisting on giving score on the status of implementation of the national education policy. To what extent you have implemented. These are some of the areas. So, in this broader context which prevailing now, which must have a clarity over the national education policy, the debate which is going on in different states, and what is the mode of central government and other state governments in the process of implementation of this policy, and also to what extent we can cope up with the pace of implementation of this policy. All these issues are coming up. And just now, Madam is saying that we have a big complaint against both central and state governments. Finance are not given. Financial allocation is not there. But she says that according to her experience. Even the allotted amount is not spent. That is the dichotomy and the contradiction which we are facing in the present context. Keeping on all these aspects in view, so definitely Madam is having a larger perspective, and she is having a understanding from not only from above and from below also. She is having the two perspectives, from higher level, from top government level, and what is going on, and the institutional level, what is going on. Just you go and click on her name, you will get so many videos in YouTube, and her participation and her debates and her lectures on the implementation of the national education policy. So these are the things to say to start with. I don't want to take much of your time, and we have already started late. So let us continue with the other items of the agenda of the meeting. So now I request Director Academic Madam to say a few words briefly about the program, and program will be explained by our SICA Director. And I request Madam, and you can divide the work. One can introduce the chief guest, and also one can speak on the program. That is better to save the time. So now I request Professor Chakrapani, Pushpa Chakrapani, to briefly mention about the program and all that.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Respected Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor K. Sitaram Rao Garu, President of today's function, and Dr. Shakila Shamshu, who is the former member, Government of India, and our Registrar, Professor A.B. and Reddy Garu, former Registrar, Professor Venkatai Garu, and former Director SICA, Professor Madhusudan Reddy, and Directors, Deans, friends, colleagues, my dear students, very good morning to all of you. Indeed, I am very happy to associate now in this program, because I am very much interested to hear you, ma'am, regarding the catalyzing transformations in higher education and ODL through NEP 2020. Yeah, we have been discussing many times about this since it has been started. And definitely rightly focuses the NEP 2020 on the need of expanding the gross enrollment ratio in higher education. If we take the 1986, it was only below 5% of GER in higher education, but in 2020 the GER in higher education is 28.4%. But this NEP 2020 takes higher to 50% from 28.4% to 50% by 2030. Of course, it is a laudable task because in knowledge economy, higher education plays an important role. Ma'am, at the same time, I would like to bring to your notice that the Telangana state also has the GER of 36.8%, which is higher than the national GER. Now, the question here is how to ensure the 50% of GER in next 5 years, that is by 2020. Maybe we hear more about this from Dr. Shakila Shamshu, because she is the member of draft committee also while drafting the NEP 2020. So at the same time, I can say that ODL also gives a significant contribution of GER, ma'am. And so when we talk about the NEP 2020, it talks about the equitable and accessible education. So when so it also emphasizes on the open distance learning as well as the online education. So by focusing the digital infrastructure and e-learning platforms and increased access to educational resources, in a way, this NEP 2020 prepares the groundwork for the future of open education in India. So there are only three aspects we can say that which are relevant to the NEP 2020 in terms of open education. What I feel the first one is digital infrastructure. Of course, NEP is very much recognizes the importance of digital infrastructure, and it aims to provide a broadband network, internet access to every education institution, and which facilitate the adoption of online education. And the second one is e-learning platforms. We all know that the policy of e-learning encompasses development of higher quality e-learning platforms and digital content in the regional languages, which also promotes the more accessible education to diverse population in the society. The third one is technology integration. We all know that the policy of technology integrates in the teaching learning process, and also we're emphasizing on the open education resources also for quality education, for more accessible, flexible also to reach more number of people, ma'am. So I have two observations when I go through the NEP 2020, madam, because I would like to know from you these two questions which I have in my mind. The first one is it stresses upon the foreign universities being set up in India. So more emphasis given to a medium of regional languages in NEP 2020. But how would the kids be managed to their higher education in foreign universities? Of course, it is good to have the option for Indian students to study in the foreign universities, madam. But at the same time, my concern is the economically backward families will be able to afford in studying the foreign universities. Whereas in India, we see that many families are unable to afford for normal fee in the colleges. Then can we say that really can we provide equitable and accessible education to all by this NEP 2020? The second observation what I have is it is the continuation of this one only, madam, emphasizing the regional languages. So, and what I feel is they are sidelining the English language. I don't say this is the English is the only language, that is the only God's language what we have to study. But at the same time, definitely English as a medium of communication for beneficial for getting the jobs in the multinational companies. So unless the India can create a good number of job opportunities in regional languages for native speakers, like what we see like in the countries of Japan and Germany, and the people in India will be deprived of getting jobs in multinational companies. Madam, these are two observations I have in my mind. I would be very glad to hear from you about this. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and came here to give a lecture on this NEP 2020. Thank you very much for now.
Thank you, Professor Krishna. Now I request our beloved registrar, Professor Reddy, to give his message.
Thank you, sir. So good morning to all. Respected dignitaries on the dais, especially on behalf of my own, on behalf of the university, I welcome you, ma'am, because you are the key person in preparing the new education policy 2020. So, really, after 3 decades discussions at various platforms, almost all need to change their education system, whatever existing. Then after deliberations in 2020 NEP, almost prepared draft release as well as the policy also executing. So there is a lot of doubts, particularly in the universities, regarding to the quality is one side and the increasing the GER second side. How you have to coincide these two? Basically, there is the doubts in my minds of universities, particularly. So, but one side, the recruitment is more drawback to state universities. Particularly, so even just central universities a little bit better than the state universities. So without having the recruitments, taking place the recruitments, how can we strengthen the quality side to particular institutions? The basic doubts are coming from one side. The second, the GER, you have to go for 2035 to 50%. So what is the roadmap particularly? To state universities as well as central universities as well as state courts particular. So what is the roadmap of the government of India? Then recently UGC is introducing some piecemeal system to the, you introduce the ABC, you introduce so and so, you introduce so on. There is no integrity between this total, whatever guidelines or whatever issued by the University Grants Commission. Recently I have been seeing that particular in the regard of NEP. So it is a good idea about the government of India, but the clear roadmap is more important than how to reach the GER 2035 to 50%. So I may be eagerly waiting about that appearance, maybe in the discussion, maybe held in at the time of draft. The what actually in the minds of the drafting committee, the what actually their idea that has to be listened to here, that better to us to know instead of the policy whatever they're talking. So anyway, thank you, madam, for coming here to address me. Thank you.
Now I request Dr. Sridevi to briefly introduce the chief guest.
Thank you, sir. Dignitaries on the dais, Honorable Vice Chancellor, President of today's program, Professor Sita Ramarao Garu, today's chief guest, Dr. Shakila Shamshu Madam Garu, chief guest of today's program, former OSD NEP, Ministry of Education, Government of India, and Secretary Estival Committee to draft NEP, and Director Academic Guest of Honor of the today's program, Professor Pushpa Chakrapani Garu, our Registrar Dr. A.V.N. Reddy Garu, and all the dignitaries of the dais, senior professors, heads of the branches, directors, deans, all the staff of the university, students, a very good morning to one and all. Welcome to the third special lecture program organized by SICA. I would like to brief about SICA Quality Lecture Series. First of all, Madam, our university has established Center for Internal Quality Assurance on 31st December 2009 based on the recommendations of Distance Education Council. The aim is to contribute to the maintenance of quality services provided by the university to its learners, to identify the key areas in which institution needs quality assessment, and also to obtain feedback from stakeholders. Later, SICA was merged with GRADE, Professor G. Ramireddy Research Academy of Distance Education on 15th April 2017. As per UGC ODL Regulations 2017, SICA separated from GRADE in 2022. Keeping in view the objectives and activities of the SICA branch, the Vice Chancellor has accorded permission to organize the special lecture series for contributing quality assurance. Here, the target groups are our faculty members, teachers from Student Service Branch, and staff of the university. Accordingly, the inauguration of the special lecture series was held on 12th April 2022, along with the first special lecture on Indian First Open University in Transition, Need for Imagining the Future Together by Professor V.S. Prasad Garu, former Vice Chancellor of our university and also former Director NAC. As a part of special lecture series, the second special lecture was held on 4th July 2022 on imparting quality skill education through open universities, issues and challenges. Professor Rajan M. Pelkar, former Vice Chancellor of the University of Mumbai and also former Vice Chancellor of YCMYU, Maharashtra. As a part of special lecture series, today we are gathered here for third special lecture on the topic Catalysing Transformations in Higher Education and ODL through NEP 2020. So we are looking forward for your speech, Madam. Thank you for accepting our invitation, Madam. Now let me introduce our guest, Professor Dr. Shakila Shamshu, Madam. So it is my honor to introduce you, Madam.
Dr. Shakila Shamshu, Pharma OSD New Education Policy, Department of Higher Education, Ministry of Education has been a part of entire exercise in the formulation of this current policy. She has been the secretary to the committee to draft National Education Policy. She was the nodal officer of the flagship Government of India scheme of National Mission on Teachers and Teaching. She held senior positions in the Government of India, Joint Advisor Education, Planning Commission, OSD for a 12th Plan, Ministry of Education. Her career spans 4 decades in teaching in the universities of Mumbai and IGNOU, including 14 years in the Government of India. She holds a PhD in distance education, gold medalist for masters, PG diploma in distance education, and a degree in law. She has to her credit a number of articles in international journals, book contributions, and in the preparation of 11th, 12th Plan and government reports. She has been privileged to be a member of various committees of the Government of India, state governments, UGC, USIEF, Fulbright National Selection Committees, Academic Council in universities, etc. She has addressed several national and international conferences within the country and abroad. She has received awards for her contribution to the field of education from different bodies. She has addressed several national and international seminars on the NEP, National Education Policy, recommendations and implementation. Currently, she is Honorary Advisor Education, Center for Public Policy and Research, Member Governing Council, India MUN, a Pan-India UN Group for Youth in Climate Action. She has recently been honored among 12 honorees of Muslim women in Kerala by the initiative of Rising Beyond the Ceiling for her outstanding contribution to the education. We are grateful for your honoring, Madam, for this kind of your contribution. So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, and for your very brief introduction of this about Chicago remarks. Now, we are ready to hear our chief guest today. I request our chief guest, Madam Dr. Shakila Shamshu, to speak on a topic allotted.
Good morning and namaskar. Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor K. Sitarama Rao Garu, Professor G. Pushpa Chakrapani, Director Academic, Professor A.V.N. Reddy, Registrar, Dr. K. Sridevi, Director SICA, special mentions of former Registrar Professor Venkatayya, who has been the key person who managed to convince me that this should not be an online session but has to be an offline session, and express the desire from the Honorable Vice Chancellor. Grateful to Professor Venkatayya because of his convincing on your behalf. I am actually able to see your beautiful university. All other members, senior faculty who are gathered here for this lecture, students and researchers, and many participants I understand who may have joined online. The title actually, Catalyzing Transformations in Higher Education and ODL through NEP, ideally should have read only as Transformations in Higher Education, because ODL is embedded as a critical component of higher education. But since we wanted a thrust on open universities and distance education, it has really been highlighted there as a separate part, and it is not to be seen that higher education is something else and ODL is something else. Please don't sit with that impression. It's only because we are in an open university, and since we are trying to understand the implications of NEP in ODL, but ODL is an integral part of the larger higher education ecosystem, and that should always remain ingrained within us. Now, before coming into the discussions here, a couple of interactions that I had with the Honorable Vice Chancellor and also with Professor Venkataya Garu helped me to understand the reason why this particular lecture is putting its focus on this particular area. So let me now try and, being an impassioned speaker on NEP, since I breathe and live it all together, it is difficult to confine within an hour's time, but I'll still try and limit it to an hour's time. So the national education policy, in the genesis of education policy making, is the third policy that independent India has seen. At the cost of repetition, the first one coming out in 68, the second one having come out in 86, partially modified in 1992, and then the third one, which is the first in the 21st century, that came out in 2020. For me, in a certain sense, it was a kind of a blessed opportunity, because I must mention in a brief background that the outgoing UPA government, when Dr. Pallam Raju ji was our minister, we had two discussions on the setting up of an education commission. And therefore, it was very much in the works that we should have a national education policy. But it then was a critical part of the manifesto of the Bharatiya Janata Party. And you see, in the ministry, we study all the election manifestos to know what may be the future thrust that comes. And it was an integral part of that manifesto, which then, as soon as they came into power in 2014, was taken on as a priority to be implemented. And right from October 2014, we actually went into this task of preparing for this national education policy. I'm using this opportunity just to make you all aware as to a very elaborate process, which in my understanding is one of the most humongous exercises of participatory consultations that has happened in the making of an education policy. Because while the Kothari Commission had a very strong committee, which included even foreigners, the CAPE committee, which brought out the 86 policy, was a much smaller exercise. Whereas this one went over 5.5 long years. And that is after the official launch on 26th of January 2015 on our Republic Day, where we started with the online consultations. And from that, we had actually moved on with not only online consultations, we had grassroots level consultations through a MyGov platform, where all the 1 lakh villages through their Gram Panchayats and block level consultations, district level consultations, and so on, then the state and the national level. This was simultaneously happening. And then we also had expert committees. And in terms of the volume of the suggestions, it is a humongous 7.5 lakh suggestions that we have through, that came in from all stakeholders. And therefore, to be a part of that exercise itself was a learning experience. I must say, very, very enriching experience. 3 documents came out. The first document was the one which was Committee for Evolution of the National Education Policy, which was headed by former Cabinet Secretary TSR, late TSR Subramaniam sir, and 4 members, 4 of them being bureaucrats and only 1 of them being academician. The academician was Professor J.S. Rajput, the former NCRT director. When we tabled this on the House of the Parliament in 2017, it was actually not approved in the sense there was a lot of hue and cry. That committee report was not accepted by the members of the Parliament in the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. There was an internal exercise we did, but by the time we had, the committee was set up during Madam Smriti Irani's time. By the time this was being answered on the Parliament, the next Union Minister was Prakash Javadekar ji, and we did an internal exercise in the ministry and we brought out a document, some inputs for the draft national education policy. Both these documents are there in public domain, one on the website of NEPA, because NEPA serviced that committee. Some draft inputs is there on the ministry's website because it was a complete internal ministry exercise. And then on that discussion, short duration discussion, wherein you saw an honorable member who was former Union Minister of Education, under whom I had also worked, Kapil Sigalji, who tore that document on the floor of the Parliament. There was an assurance given that they will constitute a committee which will be headed by academicians. And that is how the Kasturirangan Committee was constituted. Though as a person who was former ISRO chairman, an academician who has headed so many committees, I've had the benefit of having been in the Planning Commission, worked under Dr. Kasturirangan ji. He was member Science and Technology that time. Our member was Balchandra Mungulkar ji, and then subsequently Narendra Jadhav ji. So all these people were in a certain sense belonging to a background of the Planning Commission. And then of course the huge 9-member committee which had Manjur Bhargav, Vasudha Kamath, TV Kattimani ji, and many others who were part of that committee. And the question of who should be the secretary was taken up in the ministry, where they said that she's not basically a bureaucrat, she's basically a teacher. And therefore, why should we have someone else looking after it? And that is how I was blessed to become the secretary to that committee. And in a certain sense, it was a combination of both academics and administration that really helped me to see through that. So 5.5 long years. And we had so many consultations, and the Kasturirangan Committee also had a series of consultations with all the Government of India ministries, state governments, various organizations, which had resulted in that document, which is the committee report of 484 pages. That we submitted on 31st March 2020 to the incumbent minister at that time in the second round of the NDA government, Ramesh Pokhriyal-ji. The day he assumed as the minister, we handed over the committee's report. And that was put up in public domain, on which we received 2 lakh suggestions. So I can see a dichotomy in the GER dates, which I'll come to as I go, is arising because some of you, I think, have read the committee report and the policy, and some of you have read. Okay. Okay.
Please carry.
Yeah, thank you. So then you are seeing the suggestions that came, and subsequently 2019, I'm sorry, that the committee report we gave on 31st May 2019, and this policy came out on 29 July 2020, after a series of, again, consultations that came about. Now, one thing we should all understand as academics is never mix policy with politics. You must detach policy from politics. 2 major reasons. Education as a subject is a matter in the concurrent list of the Constitution of India. And as a federal setup, state governments are free to implement policies, even bring out their own policies. So in that given scenario, it is very important to understand that as educators, it does not matter to us what is the politics that go, that is for politicians to talk. For us as educators, we need to understand the policy in its intrinsic values of the recommendations. And that is very, very important, because while respecting the federal structure of this country, we must also understand that the major stakeholders are the students, the teachers, you and I, and the educational institutions. And when we talk about policy recommendations, it is to really see how does that policy benefit these stakeholders. So if you assume, for example, that a particular state, for various reasons of politics, says I will not implement it, then entire benefits of student mobility, the so-called digital bank of credits, the idea that you can take up a 4-year program, all these are denied to the students. So when we ask ourselves as educators, the question that needs to come to our mind is, should we, for the reasons of some political satisfaction, which we should not be concerned with, deny the benefits that it accrues to the student population? That is what we need to understand. So that is why I make this observation that never mix up the policy with the politics, and only try and look at the recommendations and tweak it, because we understand that India is not like small European countries or some Western countries or even some Asian countries where a one-size-fits-all model can apply. It is so diverse and in so different stages of preparedness, institutional preparedness, state government level preparedness, these being at different levels, we cannot have a one-size-fits-all model. And therefore, certain aspects will have to be localized, contextualized to meet the regional aspirations. So let us, in that spirit, try to understand the policy. And in this particular policy, you also need to understand that policies that come out do not come out because they all come out at regular intervals, and policies come out in all the sectors. You read about economic policies, industrial policies, youth policies, and so on, defense policy, all this comes out. And they all come out at regular intervals. They are never fossilized or they are never frozen for eternity. They have to keep coming out at regular intervals. When you say it comes out at regular intervals, there must be a reason why it comes out at regular intervals. Because policies that come out are not seeking to remedy any wrong or anything that was sort of, let us say, fallacious or absolutely something that was not done correctly in a previous policy. Therefore, it is neither a mid-course correction, nor is it a gap filling of previous policies. It is independently to be seen because policies are usually visionary documents that look at far-reaching reforms in response to certain changes that happen within the society and the economy. So always look at education policies or any policy in any sector as if they are independent documents. You can do a comparative study of what 86 policy said against 68 policy, what 2020 policy says against 86. You can do a comparative study as being in departments of education and in social sciences. But you are not to look at it that 2020 was correcting something in 86 policy or 86 policy was correcting something in 68 policy. Because let us say, many of us sitting here with the gray hair are people who are beneficiaries of the 68 and the 86 policy. We are reaching here because of that policy. And our students are going to be the beneficiaries of the 2020 policy. So why is a policy to come out at regular intervals? Is because it is responding to certain changes that happen within the society and the economy. What are the drivers of change that this 2020 policy took into account? Is the first thing that we need to understand as an educator. Because why I'm trying to tell you this rationale is because you already have a printed speech. I may mention over here also, I never speak with a prepared speech because I only speak extempore, and I never use a PowerPoint presentation because I find the entire attention is glued onto the slides and not to the speaker. So but I gave a prepared speech because I wanted something in your hand to get a structure of the national education policy recommendations. So I could understand when Sridevi sent me the mail, why she was asking for it, but I do not stick to what is being given to you. I am speaking quite extempore. Now, 3 changes. One is when you look at education, what are the 2 critical components? Knowledge and learning, right? I don't think any one of us in this room have any doubts. When we look at education, these are the 2 critical components. And Madam Chakrapani used a word over here that higher education is a critical contributor to a knowledge economy. She used the word knowledge economy. Knowledge by nature is a result of realizing that disciplines that exist, sociology, public administration, physics, chemistry, and so on, are not compartmentalized. It is the recognition that in the 21st century, knowledge is seen as porous, porosity of knowledge. And this is not something that came from a Western world. Our own Professor Yashpal, former UGC chairman, an eminent physicist, in his document on higher education, has mentioned about the porosity of knowledge. When you say knowledge is porous, and there is an osmosis effect where there is a cross interaction taking place among knowledge disciplines, it results in the interconnectedness of knowledge disciplines as against the compartmentalization of knowledge disciplines. That difference has led to new terms of interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, cross-disciplinarity, transdisciplinarity. As educators sitting in this room, and since we use the Google very, very commonly, if you'd like to look a review of literature on these kind of terminologies, no literature would be available in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. As you reach 1990s and 2000 and 2001, you will hear these new kinds of nomenclatures. So the character and the transformation of knowledge, which is a critical component of education, and which therefore says that knowledge does not exist in hard silos, but are getting interconnected because of the character of knowledge itself having completely metamorphosed. Can we as an education system be blind to that phenomenon of change? So that is the first critical driver of NEP's recommendation. The second is of learning. And learning, when we look at it, we all use beautifully that word learner-centric. And we've been using it, I think, for the last 2 decades without actually saying that, and open universities use it even much more. Because we say the learner is learning at one space, at one's place of convenience, as per the duration and so on. So many things that we use. But when we talk about learning as a phenomenon, forget the learner-centeredness of it. The learning as a phenomenon is also written in a document, which if we have teachers of education and some of the social sciences would have read the Delors Commission report, which talks about learning in the 21st century. The title of that report is very interesting. It says, learning in the 21st century, learning the treasure within. That is the title of the report. Learning in the 21st century, learning the treasure within. And it talks of 4 pillars of learning. The first being the learning to know, which is what a bulk of us are very familiar with. The cognitive transmission of knowledge. The knowledge that resides in us as theories, as concepts, and so on, which we pass on to the receivers, to the learners, which is the learning to know or the cognitive knowledge. The learning to do is a later phenomenon of skills. So her second lecture was on how skilling needs to be integrated. The learning to do is skills, practicals, problem solving, application of theory to real life situations, and the experiential learning. That is the learning to do. The third pillar of learning is because we are living in a time of sustainable development, and which is talking about learning to live together and to live with others. The idea of peace education, compassion, and tolerance. The idea that the 50-odd people who are gathered over here are completely different from one another in terms of our backgrounds, in terms of our capabilities, in terms of our potentials. But can we say that we cannot agree because you belong to some other caste, we belong to another community? We cannot. And therefore, diversity, agreeing to disagree, plurality, but being harmonious and not moving towards war and strife. No learning can happen in war-torn societies or in strife-driven societies. Schools become rehabilitation centers. They are not anymore places of learning. So learning to live together and to live with others has the other dimension also, in terms of trying to say you should also coexist not only with human beings, but also coexist with other forms of nature, what we call sustainable development. The 17th Sustainable Development on protecting the planet, the climate, the environment, the forest, all these are the biodiversity which we inherited from our forefathers, and where we have a moral responsibility that generations to come will enjoy it. So learning to live together and to live with others introduced in the curricula, universal human values, global citizenship education, peace education, education for sustainable development. These are not curricular subjects that ever existed in the previous century. They come only in this century because of this pillar of learning. And the final pillar of learning is what we were saying, learner centricity. It is the recognition that each learner being unique, they need to have individualization and customization. So the whole NEP base is founded on the learning to be, which is the making out a very strong case for flexible pathways, for multiple options and multiple trajectories, because we recognize that someone is good at maths, someone is good at music, someone is good at sports, someone is good at engineering. There are different talents that reside in each individual. And therefore, it is the learning to be, which is the title, learning in the 21st century, learning the treasure within whom? Within each one of us. The treasure lies within each one of us, which needs to be optimized and brought out to its maximum potential through providing flexible pathways. And this is exactly why I said that the NEP's principles actually correlates and is a kind of a, I would say, one which endorses and strengthens the idea of open and distance learning, because we believe in flexible pathways. NEP and ODL do not at any point of time contradict one another, because the fundamental premise on which the NEP recommendations have come is the imperativeness of flexibility, the imperativeness of moving towards flexible pathways, and which is what is the base of open and distance learning, which has always proposed and let us say put forward this thought that learners have to learn as per their choices, as per their times, as per their duration, as per their location. All the time when we use that word learner centricity, it was the learning to be that we were trying to emphasize upon. And that is why I have said in my prepared document that I shared with you that this mutually reinforcing factors of NEP and ODL must be appreciated by us, at least, who belong to the Open University system. It may take lesser time for us to internalize that, unlike conventional system, which is so structured and cannot accept the possibilities of flexibility. We are more open to it. So these 4 pillars of learning, along with the construct of knowledge becoming metamorphosed, with the third driver of change, and that is the disruptive technologies. The rise of the disruptive technologies, the term itself, it has disrupted the way we work, the way we communicate, the way we bank, the way we travel. Everything has been disrupted. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, data science, and today's paper, I think the Hindu or the Times of India, talks about how parents today, when they're taking school admissions, are trying to look at those areas of AI, because that is what is the future of tomorrow. So these 3 changes propelled the NEP to make the recommendations the way it is. And we as educators must be convinced that the policy is not trying to reflect any political agenda. The policy is trying to do what? Empower the main stakeholder, which is the student. The student has to be made future ready for these kind of changes. And we are looking at empowering the student with the right kind of knowledge, skills, attitudes, competencies, and capabilities, so that they become what? Productive individuals, contributing to their own productive growth, becoming economically independent, contributing to the societal development, and becoming what we may say, contributing to national growth and becoming truly global citizens. This is what is the goal. We as teachers are the catalysts for that change. We are the ones to start making the learners becoming empowered. In the process, we also need to get empowered through a lot of capacity building, attitudinal change, and shedding our so-called biases. As I often use a sentence, we cannot teach our students the way our teachers taught us. We may respect our teachers, we may value them, we may be totally dedicated to them, we can carry forward all their values of integrity and ethics and so on. But we cannot teach our students the way our teachers taught us, because our teachers were not teaching us at a time when knowledge was multidimensional, when learning was multidimensional, and the threat of disruptive technologies were threatening the kind of jobs that human beings do. So if we want to be really a committed teacher, then we have to teach students to meet with the future requirements so that they remain gainfully employed. The adage that goes is that most of us sitting over here in this room, because I assume none of you were born after 2001, are people who are called I-shaped graduates. We only had disciplinary depth. But today's employer is looking at a T-shaped graduate. Google it and search these two terms. A T-shaped graduate is where the upper bar is multiple competencies, multiple knowledge exposures, recognizing the need for multiple skill sets because knowledge itself has become interdisciplinary. So since we are I-shaped graduates, we have this very strong prejudices that my subject of mathematics, I think she is one from mathematics, is more important than history. And my subject of chemistry is more important than sociology. We created a hierarchy of disciplines. Whereas when you're in a knowledge economy, there is no hierarchy of disciplines. All disciplines are equally important, and they contribute to an amalgamation which makes an individual a holistic individual. So the NEP is focusing on using flexibility to move towards holistic understanding and holistic development in terms of the cognitive, the intellectual, the aesthetic, the moral, ethical, the physical, and socio-emotional, and so on, because it is a recognition that the beautiful gray matter in our heart skull has two hemispheres, the left and the right, and both grow together, the creative and the cognitive. So this is where we had, in the 20th century, chose to ignore the left side of the brain and chose to recognize only one side of the brain, which is the cognitive side, and not realize that the creative and the cognitive complement one another. In our committee, we had a Fields medalist, Manjul Bhargav, who is equivalent to a Nobel Prize in mathematics. He's an excellent musician. And when he is confounded with a mathematics problem, he used to go to music. And the algorithms of music and the syntaxes of music helped him to solve the problems in mathematics. We fail to recognize that. We fail to understand that the creative stimulates the cognitive. And therefore, we said about art-integrated pedagogy, sports-integrated pedagogy, because it is a recognition that the creative is not anti to the cognitive, but the creative is recognizing the cognitive. So this is the reason why when we talked about the recommendations of NEP towards multidisciplinarity, the 3-year, 4-year flexible undergraduate program, all these are emanating because of this background. And as educators, we must be convinced that it is not because X government has told us or Y government is telling this, but let us understand we are here for our students, and our students are living in a time when knowledge is multidisciplinary, where the employer is looking for multiple skill sets, where learning is multidimensional, and therefore these factors with the disruptive technologies. There are 2 lines about disruptive technologies. I'm sure you all, and I should not be sitting here in Hyderabad, which is like the IT capital of this country, and where your chief ministers after chief ministers have been talking about the strength of cyber power, right? And here, when you talk about disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence and hear people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates, you will commonly hear a statement that if artificial intelligence is implemented in the manner it is being currently done, there will be no jobs for human beings 7 years down the line. Which means that if you want our students to be gainfully employed and productive, let us be cognizant. Let us recognize that we need to make them competent to meet with those challenges. Driverless cars and so on which come is machine intelligence challenging human intelligence. I am a great movie lover and I watch a lot of movies. All your science fiction movies, whether you call it Transformers or you call it Mission Impossible or whatever, and you must have heard of Frankenstein at least, I'm sure. The creator who makes it is the human being, but the machine can never become the triumphant person. Man must ultimately triumph over the machine. The moment it is the machine triumphing over man, it is the end of planet Earth. So let us understand that machine intelligence is challenging human intelligence and looking at what? With the job profiles that are dynamically changing. And therefore, we cannot say that, no, I just don't want to talk about it. So let me not sit here maybe 5 kilometers away from your high-tech city, which houses all the multi-giants in the field of technology. And therefore, also understand this importance that we must empower our students with the disruptive technologies, that they need to know all this, because you cannot, whether you like it or not, be completely ignorant of not taking that factor into account. Now, coming to the recommendations of the NEP, I have already given you the matter that needs to be seen. We talked about restructuring higher education institutions. India has one of the largest higher education systems in the world. We have, as per the latest All India survey, 1,062 universities. We have some 47,000 affiliated colleges. We have some 12,000 standalone institutions. We have some 16 or 17 lakh faculty, and we have some 44 million students who are there. And this complex higher education system is quite fragmented by the disciplinary offerings, by the jurisdiction, by the kind of modes of learning, by the ownership, central, state, or private, deemed universities, affiliating universities, unitary universities, and so on. So we in the policy, in the committee, we said, let us forget this kind of differentiation and look at higher education. What is higher education's functionality? Teaching, research, and community engagement or social engagement or extension, as we used to call it once. These are the three functions of higher education. One is knowledge dissemination. The other is knowledge generation and knowledge production, which is research. And the third is the social connect between higher education and the community and the society. It is for improving the lives of the people around us. It is not for an imaginary purpose. It is for really bringing about change and improving the quality of life around us. So why don't we divide, or why don't we rationalize higher education in terms of the functions? So teaching intensive universities, research intensive universities, and a major reform in the affiliation system. So the understanding is to be that, and I may mention that what we wrote in the committee's report and what we articulated in the policy, there are 2 or 3 areas which have been very different from what we wrote. In the policy, we call teaching universities, research universities, multidisciplinary education and research universities, but we never use the word teaching intensive or research intensive. This was because finally it appeared like a pyramid with the affiliated colleges at the base, the teaching universities at the mid-level, and the research university, and higher education is not pyramidal. It has to be seen as spread over and not to be seen in a pyramidal structure. Therefore, we said it is teaching intensive with large focus on undergraduate and in some areas PG and doctoral. Research intensive, where largely it is focusing on PG and doctoral and postdoctoral with some undergraduate departments. And the third rung, which is the 47,000 affiliated colleges, and where we wanted from so long back, I am telling about 2006 when I was in the Planning Commission, and we were writing the 11th 5-year plan document. We have said about phasing out the affiliation system. And here we came with the idea that can we phase it out over a 15-year window by 2035 to move towards a new system of degree granting autonomous colleges. Now, please don't think that when I say that we will have 47,000 universities or colleges by that time. It is only that you will have to rationalize. Some of these colleges which are already being given the potential for excellence can convert to become teaching intensive. Some colleges can come together to become cluster universities, and some of them would still remain as constituent colleges for purposes of equity. So what were our 5 envisioned goals? Access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability. And these words also we've been hearing for years on end. And we do not even seem to understand that these are not mutually exclusive. They are also to be seen as an amalgamated whole. When you ensure access, you have to ensure that all cross sections get it. Therefore, you have to be equitable also, right? And when you access and give access and ensure equity, can you dilute quality? No. You have to ensure that there is quality education. And in order to ensure equity and to give access, as she said, when you have foreign universities, whether you offer equitably or not, it has to be affordable. And the primary stakeholders in trying to achieve these goals cannot abdicate their responsibility, and therefore they are accountable. Each one of us, as the stakeholder, as the teacher, as the parent, as the student, as the senior management, as the heads, as the directors, as the dean, as the vice chancellors, each one is accountable. Accountable not to external accountability, but also for the goals that we are here for. In a certain sense, accountability to oneself. And therefore, the SDG goal 4, when you read, to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education with lifelong learning opportunities for all, which is what we are committed to as a member of the United Nations. By 2030, that we will ensure this. That means that we will work towards the collective goal of providing quality education, but it should be inclusive and equitable quality with what open and distance education always professed, lifelong learning opportunities. The need to constantly upgrade and to constantly do it as long as you are alive, from birth to death, that you remain a learner and that you keep acquiring more and more knowledge. So this idea of the goals of education has to be understood in the sense that these goals are to be taken forward by each one of us as universities. So the GER target, incidentally, is the major deviation we had. You said 2030.
35.
We wrote it 2035. At that time, our secretary was Subramaniam sir, who is also from this part of the world. And when we said 2030, in the document, in the committee's report, we said we will universalize secondary education by 2030, which is our feeder route, students coming out of secondary education. So if you're universalizing secondary education and the current transition rate, which is somewhere in the range between 67 to 70% coming into higher education, you cannot put the same cutoff dates. So that is how we said we will reach 50% by 2035. Every line we write has to have a scientific understanding behind it and a rationale behind it. So universalization of secondary education in the new paradigm of the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4, which we are saying the secondary stage is 9 to 12 as one stage, will be achieved by 2030 with this whole idea of the foundational literacy and numeracy to ensure that there are no dropouts at the so-called current terminology of elementary, which we talk about the foundational and the preparatory stage. That to be there, the numbers, the feeder route has to be there. That is why we said about 2035. And for this, every institution has to prepare a document that we call the Institutional Development Plan. So to do that, your 5 goals of access, equity, quality, all that, you have to prepare an IDP, which is a strategic plan of action. So in that, you set your targets. So what is your current enrollment? And where would BR Ambedkar Open University want to reach Where would open and distance learning as an entire group of institutions want to reach is something that has to be worked out. So the IDP will set, and mind you, let me also tell you, all universities have a vision and a mission and a set of goals and objectives. That is somehow frozen in point of time. That needs to be revisited. It has to be revisited because, as I said, a system is responding to changes. Therefore, when you make an IDP, you will revisit your vision, mission, and goals and objectives in the light of the NEP and move towards working out what are your strategic goals, what are your key outcomes that you want to achieve with timelines, what is your own SWOT analysis, what is my strengths, weaknesses. Does B.R. Ambedkar Open University have the infrastructure? Do we have the human resources? Do we have the faculty? Do we have the library resources? Do we have the learning resources? All these have to be taken into account through a very rigorous SWOT analysis. And who prepares this document? It is not made by the government or it is not made by the industry. It is by all of us as a collegiate exercise, a collective exercise of faculty, student representatives, parent representatives, senior management, civil society, academic community, scientific community, industry, all of them coming together in a collective exercise. For the purposes of the institution, you can create a task force, which is mandated with this task. But it has to be a document that takes into account all these voices, which is there when you come. It is this document which will ensure that what Telangana does may be quite different from what Uttar Pradesh does or what Kerala does. And what B.R. Ambedkar Open University may be doing may be different from what Kakatiya University or Osmania University may be doing. So each institution takes into account its own effective plan of action. And that is where I said that never connect yourself to the larger politics. You go by your institution, what is needed from your institution's perspective. So when you articulate these targets, when you say GER target, she said it is 36, already crossing the national average. Good. But are you inclusive? Have the SCs come in? Have the STs come in? Have the linguistic and religious minorities come in? How many people who are differently abled, intellectual disabilities, as well as physical disabilities, urban poor, women, transgenders, all these. So you work it out from all these points of view. So when you talk about equity, the policy talked about equity and inclusion in two chapters. Chapter 6 for school education and chapter 14 for higher education. And we actually had again here on this point a little difference. In the draft committee's report, we used a word underrepresented groups. And we received a lot of criticism that it is a very Americanized word. And it is an Americanized word in a certain sense. Whereas in India, we recognize the disadvantaged, the marginalized, in terms of the disparities coming from caste, community, language, region, economic background, gender, disabilities, and so on. So we said that a more palatable term has to be seen. Now, we were also criticized when the policy was approved that we didn't speak about reservation. Reservation is mandated by the constitution of this land. And no committee has any power to make any recommendation that goes ultra vires the constitution of the land. I was in the planning commission when we brought out the 27% OBC for the 27% reservation for the OBCs. You remember the whole of India was on fire. We then raised it up to 54% general seats so that it does not affect the admissions to the general seats. To give that benefit of the 27%, we doubled it up. So whether it is IITs or IIMs or central universities and all, we doubled it up. That is how that was also introduced as a constitutional amendment. So the reservation for the SCs, STs and OBCs has not come from a committee's decision. It is coming from the Constitution itself, where you're talking in terms of ensuring their participation, and therefore no committee talks about it. Have a look at the 68 policy and the 86 policy. You will not hear the word reservation. But we talked in the 86 and the 68 policy in subsections: education of the scheduled castes, education of the scheduled tribes, education of minorities, education of other backward classes, education of economically poor section, girls and women, children with disabilities. We had separate subsections. We created an omnibus term. In what we said, just as we wrote in the committee report, URGs represent, we changed that word to have a more Indianized word: socially and economically disadvantaged groups. SCDGs as an umbrella term to include these cross sections. And therefore, said we can have special education zones, we can have gender inclusion funds, social inclusion funds, provide scholarships, free ships, provide all facilities in terms of teaching, learning resources, transportation, books, and other requirements for the learning disabled, whatever access devices are required, and ensure in higher education, a point that Dr. Pushpa has mentioned, that we will offer it in regional languages. That's a game changer, my dear. In a country like India, which speaks with dialects 1,620 languages, no country in the world is home to so many languages. And these include languages without the dialects, without the script, which are the dialects. You read only about the 22 languages in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. That is just those languages that are listed in the 8th schedule. And country like India, where do our people live? Largely in the rural areas. And what is their occupation? Largely agriculture. In such a nation, where the bulk of the people are coming from this background, and many aspire for higher education, but do not come into higher education because it is offered in a foreign language. Let us be very clear. I am a very proud person who speaks English, and I believe in the strength of English as a language. But that does not mean that because someone is speaking in chaste Telugu, I am more intelligent than the person who speaks in Telugu. Let us never attribute that. It is the power of language, and whether you are able to speak in that language is what is important. So as an aspiring Indian, where higher education is not being taken up by a bulk number of students, and you want to achieve a GER target, you are not doing it at the cost of English, and I'll clarify that to you. You are actually opening up opportunities for many who would have hesitated to come into higher education by offering it in regional languages. But that, if you see the 4-year curriculum that we talked about, all ability enhancement courses are for English language. And right from school education, where we talk of mother tongue education and home language and local language, we have said that English as a language has to be taught. The National Curriculum Framework for School Education, approved in October 2023, also talks about English language as one of the languages to be taught. So it is not at the cost of English language. It is that English communication skills have to be given. We do recognize that it is internationally done, but let us also as a nation be proud of the fact that unlike any other nation in the world, we have so many languages. And if it is a fact that is deterring people coming from higher education, let us offer it. Where is the challenge? I may speak Malayalam, I can't read or write it, but I cannot teach in Malayalam. Okay, I can speak Hindi and Marathi, I read and write also. Similarly, all of you. But we are largely used to communicating in English. So bringing out our bilingual skills, getting your materials translated, which is ongoing as a work right now, we should be able, in a period of time, to have a set of people who will be bilingually strong, both in English language as well as their own regional languages. And that is a strength and not a disadvantage. That is a strength. Do we write in our CV, languages spoken? Don't we write that? The more we write, we feel better about it. So let us be honest about it. Knowing more languages is a strength. And it is not just for the romanticism of languages. Let me also tell you the empirical data behind that. UNESCO report tells that children learn languages, as many as 17 languages effortlessly between the ages of 2 to 8. That is why you realize that when children grow up in cosmopolitan communities, you may speak only your mother tongue and maybe English, but the child has a friend who speaks Gujarati, who speaks Telugu, and I've lived in Bombay. I know that we can speak languages. I learned languages because we lived in a situation like that, because children pick up languages better. Second, that language is directly related to cognitive understanding. That the more languages you speak, your cognitive capabilities are enhanced. There is a direct correlation in that. Therefore, not undermining the importance of English, we must be able to nurture the need for the promotion, development, and preservation of our Indian languages. And there are certain languages in the Northeast which are without dialect, only orally spoken, and maybe the last person alive is 102 years old. And you need to digitize that, because with that person going, that language is lost, that dialect is lost. That is the kind of crisis we are in. So the preservation, protection, and promotion of Indian languages urges universities to set up more language departments. And that is also, in the long run, it will have a lot of benefit when our students learn more languages. The lack of teachers who can teach bilingually and teach in regional languages is a capacity building we may have to build on. And that is the reason why, as an equity measure, and mind you, we faced a lot because that cannot ever be said in public domain, but we were asked that higher education should only be in regional languages, which we opposed tooth and nail. We said we cannot write that at all. We can only say that we will encourage it in regional languages. So the word used is, I don't know how many drafts we corrected to use the right word in that policy, to ensure that we do not give, you see, a policy is subject to interpretation. What I interpret and what Sridevi interprets and what Pushpa interprets will be different, because we have our own biases with which we look at that. And that is why when you read law books, you will wonder, what is this language? Why? Because there is no subject of interpretation. It is written like that. Whereas here, in common language, it is subject to a lot of interpretations. And therefore, the need to urge, we can only say that. We can't point a gun and say that you have to offer it in regional language. You have to use it in a manner that can be acceptable to all. And mind you, in school education, this is the most difficult recommendation to be implemented. You have to map, because language changes every 10 kilometers. The dialect changes. The home language varies. The local language varies. Where are the teachers? Is the first question, isn't it? So this is what, but policies never restrict their recommendation to the pragmatic situation, because it is always seen as visionary. It is something that we think is doable, and then you work your strategies towards it. So the reason for equity, we have talked about regional in higher education. If you want the GER to go up and you offer it, continue to offer it only in English, the likelihood of our GER, though I am fully aware and cognizant of the fact that Telangana offers, I think, even your school education compulsorily only in English language. That's why I said each state is left to do it as long as they are teaching other languages. And let us not reach a stage. I often say that because I had my entire education in Bombay. If you ask a student in Bombay, even today, I'm talking about today, in fact, even more today, that where does an apple come from? Don't be surprised if that child will tell you from Reliance Fresh. Because he doesn't know, or she doesn't know, that an apple is cultivated. This is the ignorance of our child today in an urban setting, completely disconnected from understanding how agriculture takes place. You see, we played with using our hands and the mud. We felt the mud. And the mud is the one where we are. We fail to recognize that. Gandhiji said the head, the heart, and the hand. That is what the whole idea of Nayi Talim is all about. The Bloom's technology will tell you the cognitive, the affective, the psychomotor. These are things that we need to understand. This is a part of education, right? And you must feel that. Even as I say, I'm getting the goosebumps as I say. Children are not recognizing these things today. And it is necessary that we bring this. So that is why we have incorporated the need for skills. We have incorporated the needs of language. We have incorporated the value-added courses. So the 4-year curriculum is not something, because you have all now started moving towards that 4-year curriculum. A lot of planning, 6 categories of courses, the common courses, the core courses, the multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, the value-added courses, the skill enhancement courses, and coming to skills. Don't think skills is only plumbing and electrical and all that. It is very high-end. It is logistics. It is about supply chain management. It is about service sector, hospitality sector, health and wellness. So many sectors that have come. And the same article today talks about many of these sectors also, where today parents would like their children, because when you say we do not know the jobs of tomorrow, what will come to use to a student who has learned that? At least the basics are known to them for them to take up a career into that area. So the idea of multidisciplinarity, multiple skill sets, all emanate from this. The policy recommended reimagining vocational education and rejuvenating and strengthening open and distance learning. And I'll come to that part in the last part of my talk. I think I can go on for another 10 minutes. Yeah. So the idea that open and distance learning is important is being weaved into our 4-year curriculum, because we have said that 40% of the credits in non-technical courses can be done through open and distance learning. Of course, that is the UGC guidelines, but we said that if there are no courses which are multidisciplinary in a given area, the student can choose to take up courses through open and distance learning. It's weaved into that, the flexibility even in the modes of learning. Then research and innovation. The emphasis in India at undergraduate education, and the reason why Indian universities do not feature in any global rankings beyond a single digit is because we do not emphasize on research at undergraduate education. And research is what? It is the power of curiosity. It is the power of inquiry. It is the power of questioning. And what have we been used to? We've been used not to use the power of questioning. Ask yourselves, when you were a child and you wanted to ask questions, the teacher will tell you, don't ask questions and disturb the class. And we are used to students sitting passively from 9 to 4 with their lips sealed, completely only being receivers. How can such a student ever have the rational thought, the critical thinking, the analytical skills, the problem-solving abilities? So the complete shift that we are seeing from the middle stage, right, in the way we will not test memory, we will test critical abilities, cognitive thinking, problem-solving abilities. Therefore, the role of a teacher has to completely change. The way we teach is one in which we will not have passive learning, but we will have active learning and directed to outcome-based education. So here, research is another component we are nurturing from class 6. Let us all be very fair. We all are sitting with that powerful BR before us. And that comes not suddenly when we complete our masters. It should be something that is rankling within us much before that. Therefore, you nurture research right from a very young age. It's not a bright bulb. Suddenly, when I become 22, I become research-oriented. It is something that is nurtured within us. So a research bent of mind has to be nurtured to nurturing the power of curiosity, the analytical thinking capabilities, and what we call problem-solving abilities. There is a problem, how do I solve that? There is an issue, this is not being touched upon, I want to study on that. So research has got an impetus through the National Research Foundation and through that. Now, coming to 2-3 instrumentalities before, and so research and innovation, entrepreneurial education, And I'll come to ODL and its I would say the complementarities between NEP and ODL, just as I wind up. But two or three points that I would really like to sort of touch upon over here is the fact that when we talk in terms of all these changes that we are visualizing, it is something that we need to visualize on a mass scale and not limited to certain institutions. And that is very important because you cannot think multidisciplinarity is not my baby, it is somebody else's baby. It has to be something that is sort of permeating throughout the higher education system. So research and innovation, entrepreneurial skills, all this. Now the instrumentalities, three major instrumentalities. Academic bank of credit permits the flexibility and the mobility. The idea of the National Higher Education Qualification Framework, which incorporates equivalence of courses, and the National Credit Framework. Have a look at the National Credit Framework. The mobility between ODL and mainstream education, vocational, polytechnic and mainstream education, all that is weaved into that. So these three instrumentalities allow for the credit mobility, the student mobility across institutions, and allow higher education institutions, whether they are ODL, whether they are polytechnic education, technology education, all of them in the new makeup of multidisciplinarity to ensure that students acquire credits as per certain levels that are indicated in the National Credit Framework. Now, here there is also a need to understand that when you have meetings within the universities, though you may have departments existing, meeting should now be one where all the faculty, the technical staff, and some of the administrative decision makers, along with the senior management, come together. Because when you look at ABC, so the ABC, a recent phenomenon, when we talked about it in the policy, we visualized that Aadhaar could be the ID for the student. But now recently we came about this APAR, which is the Automated Personal Academic Account Registration. So that as long as that student is studying, and even after studying going abroad, that APAR is his unique ID for the student. Now coming to what a major concern that Madam Pushpa has raised, internationalization of higher education. Here again, sitting in Telangana, it is odd to say that because the maximum number of students going abroad come from the state. And we are seeing an increasing trend of that. So when we say, don't look at either or, India has varieties of institutions which cater to different cross sections of the society. Merely because we will allow foreign universities to come here, it will not in a certain sense be a direct denial of inclusion and equity. And that is also to tell you that competition is not a bad word. Competitiveness is not a bad word. It becomes bad if you follow different rules of the game. If you keep changing the rules of the game as the game goes along, and if it is an unfair competition. Competitiveness must be there in each one of us. It is the bar which helps you to excel. And competitive spirit must be nurtured in our children. In the same way, the entry of foreign universities, subject to the fact that they are governed by a set of regulations which do not give them an added advantage, in no way affects the factor of equitability. In fact, the rising aspirations, and if I were to put a survey right now and ask how many of us children are studying abroad in any university, and the best brains in this country, and the higher middle class and the common middle class, we have three types of the middle class. Even the lower middle class, what we will say, has their only aspiration to send their child abroad for education. So we have 7.5 million students going out every year. And the number of foreign students coming here is a minuscule 40,000 students. In that scenario, to a great extent, offering not only the joint degrees, the dual degrees and the twinning programs, but allowing foreign universities to set up campuses should be one where, as an Indian parent, my son is or my daughter is still in my own homeland and still pursuing a degree in a foreign university, should be able to stem the tide of many of our students who are going abroad. Kerala also is seeing this trend, a huge migration of students going for PG education or doctoral studies, going for undergraduate education, and educational institutions becoming unviable. So we must be cognizant that merely saying that, and mind you, let us not condemn something for the sake of condemning it. I am not one, as someone who has always been humanistic, I am not one who says that bring foreign university because we want to show we can also get it. No, it has to have a rationing, it has to have a purpose. The only concern that came is that during the UPA, we wanted to bring about a legislation for the foreign education providers. There were 9 important legislations. 5 of them lapsed out because it could not get passed. One of them is this foreign education providers. It was said in the policy also that it should come through a legislative route. Why legislative? Because once the houses of the parliament pass it, it means all the public representatives are taking a view to pass that as a law. But UGC brought it out through an executive decision, through a regulation. That is where there is something, but I would still not like to condemn it because we wanted that as in the policy. This seemed to be a route. I still do not understand because many bills got passed at the national level because of the majority. And this could have also come, but it has not been done through that route. But as now they are inviting the applications, we need to see whether actually the top, we wrote top 100. But then we wrote in the policy, in the committee's report, we wrote 100. In the policy document, we wrote top 200. And UGC has now said the top 500. In that, whether it is the not so the mediocre quality universities, whether they would be the ones, because you must understand countries like Australia and all commercialize education. It is not, they market education as a public good. I mean, as a private good, not as a public good. Whereas we look at education as a public good and as a public service and a not-for-profit activity. That is the dichotomies that we need to understand. But there should be really no reason, just because foreign universities come here, it goes against the spirit of access or equity or inclusion and so on. It is something that we need to ensure that the norms are followed. And the last point that I will come before I talk about ODL is the regulatory part of it. In distance education also, there is a huge dilemma. And I say that because at one time, we talked in the policy that the regulatory system must be light but tight, right? That is the statement we used. And we saw that UGC as a regulatory body is becoming all powerful because it does regulation, it does funding, it does the academic standard setting, and it does the accreditation. All the 4 functions in the same body, which is not desirable because it is an over-concentration of mutually conflicting roles, and over-concentration, because it is mutually conflicting, results in nothing being done sometimes, or it is over-regulated in certain sense. So all that we wrote in the policy is that a Higher Education Commission of India should be an umbrella body with 4 independent verticals: the National Higher Education Regulatory Council for regulation, the National Assessment Council, NAC, not the existing NAC, the NBA NAC will get merged and go under the NAC, which is for assessment and accreditation, the Higher Education Grants Council, which is for funding, and the General Education Council, which will set standards along with professional standard setting bodies. So all the 17 regulators will be converted to becoming professional standard setting bodies. Once HECI becomes as a bill and act, UGC, NCT, AICT all become null and void. Whatever, because you have to, when you bring out a legislation, previous acts must become null and void. UGC having come out through an act, if it has to be superseded, it has to come out, just as we did for NRF. NRF also came as an act because there is a Science Education Research Board, which came out as a legislative act and not as a executive decision. That is why NRF today, the Rashtriya Anusandhan Act, has come out, because only by an act you can remove a previously legislatively created body. The same way we said here that this is to come in as a legislation, that we will create these 4 verticals, but that did not happen. So what registrar said, in piecemeal you have guidelines coming out from the UGC. What is ABC, what is the 4-year program, multiple entry and exit, NHEQF, 2-year PG program, all these PhD regulations, all are coming out in a piecemeal manner, adding to the confusion for states to implement it. But I would still say that since all these regulations could not have come out at one point of time, and we don't have a higher education implementation plan, and the implementation is seen over a 15-year window, we would still understand that let states study these and do it in the manner that they can. To give you an example, the 4-year undergraduate program, Kerala, I come right now from Kerala, completely opposed the NEP. They said 3 C's, Kerala opposed it: centralization, commercialization, and communalization. And today they bring out the 4-year framework, 80% cut, copy, paste of the 4-year curriculum from NHEQF, from the UGC guideline. But what did they say? We will not give exit in first year. We will not give exit in 2 years. I can read where it comes. Right now itself, 7,000 students Santa Monica sends in one day to Canada. If you say exit in first year and exit in second year, you may lose that number also. So I can understand from where it comes. So they said exit only in the 3rd year. So let each state work it out. We wrote 40 credits per year, leading to 120 and 160 respectively. They wrote 133 credits for 3 years and 177 credits for 4 years. Every state has brought it out in the manner that they wanted to bring it out. But largely all of them are conforming to the need that you should have common courses, core disciplinary courses, multidisciplinary courses, skill enhancement courses, ability enhancement courses, and value-added courses. These remain more or less the same. And your 4th year with bachelor's with research is also accepted by them. They may like to call it as capstone courses, different nomenclature. What is a name that calls anything else? A rose by any other name still does the same. So it really doesn't matter. It is a question of regional aspirations, political agendas, whatever. Let us not get into all those things. As educators, let us only understand that each state government looks at broadly the UGC guideline as recommendatory and then evolves its own guidelines and regulations to suit the regional requirements. Now, coming to NEP and ODL itself, as I said at the beginning, ODL is a forerunner of NEP. Why? Because it emphasized on the need for flexibility. And NEP actually strengthened that, because in many ways, the character of knowledge, learning, and the disruptive technologies forced us to go towards flexible pathways. Now, the GER target, when we wrote to reach 50% by 2035, we incorporated that it includes the ODL and vocational education. In that sense, it is sort of reinforcing the fact that a brick and mortar education, which requires more substantial funding, may be seen in a revenue resource constrained nation to think of going in through open and distance learning. Now, the concern that came is on the quality assurance. And that is precisely, she is here as SICA person. The idea that you must have both internal quality assurance, because you are fighting a perception war. And what is that perception war? That anyone coming from the ODL is second class to regular face-to-face. Though there is no evidence that regular face-to-face is offering quality, the assumption that it is through ODL itself puts in this condition that no, it is ODL education, open university, uska degree ko value nahi hai. That is the perception that we need to change. And that can come in only through tangible measures in terms of quality assurance. And therefore, the need that we felt for setting up the kind of bodies that we have like SICA conventionally what you have as the IQAC, are all emanating from the need for internal quality assurance. External came in through accreditation. And in accreditation also, let me tell you, policy recommended binary accreditation. No country in the world except Pakistan and a few Asian countries does accreditation the way we do it. World over, institutions are either accredited or not accredited. And this whole mechanism that we follow, and the concern that I got only B, or someone got B plus, someone got A plus, someone got A plus plus, is all something that we wanted. As a consequence, what has happened? The number of accredited institutions in our country, because it's voluntary, is very, very less. And this we want to remove by saying all higher education institutions must be accredited. And they will come in, going in, either accredited, not accredited. If they're not accredited, it's not that the sword has fallen on their head. They will arrive at certain kind of mentoring and benchmarks and standards in a graded manner, achieve that accreditation. And those who have already been accredited can go in for that. So we said that let ODL systems also come in through that. Now what has happened is ODL got embroiled through agencies which come in through the conventional system. So we didn't have a distance education council. UGC took the Distance Education Bureau. UGC is one of the bodies which cannot think beyond structured education. Therefore, the CBCS, which we got bound by, is a complete, actually, negation of flexibility that the ODL systems talk about. But since we cannot say that I will not follow the traffic signal because I come from another planet. You have to follow the rules. That is why you need to follow it. So the NEP has given enablers for that. And these accreditation changes will be an enabler. And let me not reiterate what already Dr. Pushpa has said for paucity of time, that the NEP talks about technology integration, talks about digital universities, virtual universities, online education, all what is professed by the ODL system. And these are being given a lot of emphasis even in the NEP. But overall, let us not look at NEP and ODL as two different creatures. Let me also mention the angst. 3.5 years down the line, the policy has been approved. And at any forum I speak, NEP still appears like the elephant in the room. We do not know whether it's a tail or the head. You know that picture we draw and wondering what this strange creature is. It still remains like that, something that we are still trying to understand. All that I want to say is that in a class which has a bird, which has a crocodile, which has a rat, which has an elephant, which has a lion, the teacher cannot come and say, I want all of you to fly. Because except for the bird, no one else can fly. The recognition that each one has different learning needs, and therefore the learning processes, the teaching processes have to be individualized and customized, is a great boost for ODL systems. And let us use that, and in the given guidelines that are there, let us try and see how best we can implement it so that it benefits the primary stakeholder, the learner. I'd also say that let us not also be worried, because I always say little drops of water make the mighty ocean. So let us all do our might to the roles that we are connected with. Let us not think like the Atlas, like the great thinker Atlas. When you hear about Atlas, what do you think? The person carrying the whole globe on his shoulder, right? So we will feel such a big burden. Let us not think we are Atlas. Let us do our limited part, what we are capable of in the roles that we think, and where NEP has been an enabler to visualize it in terms of implementing it. Then you will find that the collective efforts will come together in realizing the larger goals. Let me stop here and thank you for your patient hearing.
very much, ma'am.
Fellow took away my tea. I take it very cold actually. Like a cold drink.
I stand here on behalf of the Vice Chancellor because he got urgent phone call and he asked me to preside this the remaining session of your this program, ma'am. So I am standing here. First of all, thank you very much for your wonderful and thought-provoking lecture. And I have nothing to say anything, but what you said is true, ma'am. We should not combine the policy with the politics. And we should see the policy as an independent thing, and because it is responding to the changes driven by the society, as you say, and there are two critical drivers like knowledge and learning, where knowledge we see as the multidisciplinary, and the learning, what you explain is really fantastic to know, to do, and to live together, and to live with others. And the last one is learner centricity, that is learning to be. Really a beautiful explanation, ma'am. Really, it is a brainstorming and needs to be discussed at length also. As you said, NEP 2020 emphasizes the flexibility, which is not the contrary to the philosophy of ODL, which is the flexible learning. And when you talk about disruptive technology, you're 100% correct, ma'am. But the thing is that the whole society is running towards the technology. But as if human beings, we should be very careful while dealing with the technologies. As you said, machine intelligence is challenging the human intelligence. But as humans, we must be very careful. And ultimately, as a teacher, it is our responsibility to how we have to take our students while giving the knowledge in the digital era. And the other thing, I have one point to discuss or to express my this one is regarding the regional languages. You said, yeah, I completely agree with you, madam, what you said. But up to the primary and middle education, I do agree that it should be in the regional languages. But what my concern is, now we are seeing that many professional courses like medicine and even engineering are teaching in Telugu or in their own languages. But how for these people, when they go for higher education at even in abroad, is it really? But don't you think that that is a hindering point for the students who take their professional courses in the regional languages? That is only my concern. And the last one is, as you said, that the ODL and NEP 20 is not two different aspects. And really, we felt so happy to know that the future of open education in India looks promising with the NEP 2020 as it creates an enabling environment for growth of online and distance learning initiatives. Thank you, madam. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. And I take this opportunity to thank you once again. And also, if there are anything, any query, any discussion, I'll leave this platform for the discussion for 5 or 10 minutes, because all the teachers who are sitting here, I think it is a really brainstorming lecture. And I hope we have so many doubts in your minds. So if you have anything, madam is here to clarify.
Yeah, I would like to thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful explanational lecture on NEP. You have.
Can I have the pleasure of knowing you?
This is Sudha. I'm senior professor in history and director D. Ram Reddy Center for Research and Development, GRPRD. A wonderful journey of your lecture, which took us right from the background of NEP 60s and 80s policy to the present 2020. I'll be very happy to say that, when we are in, when I was a director, this was the first, soon after the NEP was declared, like, it's we had a talk by Professor V.S. Prasad on exactly the similar topic of, ODL, what could be the stakes of ODL in NEP. So we have identified that, it's not particularly discussed about ODL and NEP, but this kind of flexibility was there from the beginning. ODL institutions have been following the multiple, the flexibility of taking admission and the natural languages. So offering the education in Telangana states and Andhra. So most of the similarities we have represented to the Chancellor also when a discussion took place about NEP, meeting called by Chancellor, Governor. So this is fine, while regulating, it must be a global one. But the interpretation you are talking about doesn't clearly mentions about the ODL institutions. The stakes of ODL are just recently also we discussed about 160 odd universities, conventional, and 47,000 the affiliated colleges. They contribute to the mere 20% or 25% of the higher education GR, gross enrollment ratio. But mere 18 open universities contribute to more than 10% of the GRs. So when we take these numbers, for some time we forget about the numbers, but the contribution is much higher to open and distance education institutions. So when this contribution, taking into cognizance of the contribution, I feel as an academic here that the special focus would have been made in the NEP or in the following formulations also. Because we are abided by these guidelines, UGC guidelines, and all the regulations and all it's pushed on us. CBCS, as you rightly said, we don't know where to swim. We don't knowing the swimming, we just jumped into the waters of CBCS and successfully we completed the task and offering very truthfully now. But initially it was very difficult for us, like open universities. But somehow we could achieve it. But what I'm saying is the recognition part of the courses and several other regulations of UGC, it's very hard on us, the ODL institutions. And somewhere I feel that, kind of a balancing or kind of a thing is missing in this entire process. That is one thing. And inclusiveness. The second aspect which I want to hear from you. Yes, it's heterogeneous country and you will be knowing better than me because you have been in the process of the policy formation in the education field. So the higher education portals, how many the marginalized sections are entering into the portals of it. And when the target is there 50%, and how long it takes person from the marginalized communities, SCs, scheduled tribes, not even, it's not even 10%, all put together. 3%, 4% SCs entering into the portals of higher education. How long years will it take, which we, go on with this process of, offering vernacular language or mother tongue at primary or secondary levels. At the same time, we want the child to compete with the global world. So global world demands the ever-changing technology and the language. And see, for my example, I have been educated in the vernacular language up to 10th. But later, in the government institutions, coming from the humble background, I'm going to the higher education institution to JNU in Delhi. That was a big war, conflict within us. How to communicate with your peer groups, how to communicate with your teachers. So the grades were always below B plus B for the communities. But It was a struggle which we could successfully done, and we are here now. But how many of us, like of the communities, with this Telugu or Urdu background here, because language is such a barrier, when we enter into research contributions of these regional states we observe, the research contributions is very less. Ability to communicate in English, make themselves visible in the world, is also a problem. And obviously, English is not going to leave us for how many years, I don't know. And in this scenario, fine, like, heterogeneity is being taken care, but how the languages, as Director also said, is going to be a solution for increasing the enrollment ratio or to make them competent in the competition world, today's competition. That's my concern. So we've been working out with this, but very few of them are able to come up into this highly competitive world. So this is the unseen concern which I want you to ponder upon. Thank you.
Any other observations before I take them up together?
Anybody, please be focused and please.
Yeah, ma'am, good morning.
Yeah.
Ma'am, my name is Ravindra. I am the Director in Charge, Center for Skill Development and Career Plan. I have a very specific and straight question, ma'am. In our university, we offer regular programs like BA, BSc, and BCom. And NEP talks about integrating skill education into the mainstream education. Now, we do not have facilities to offer, or rather, I do not have the expertise to offer skill-based courses exclusively. And there are institutions which are purely skill-based institutions, like the National Academy of Construction, where only skill-based programs are offered. So, can I have an agreement with the NAC, wherein I recognize the programs offered by them as a substitute to my skill-based programs? Say, we have got CBCS, choice-based credit systems, where we have got skill-based courses like personality development or soft skills, which are generic in nature. So, can we integrate the courses offered by other institutions to our own programs? Is that possible?
Anybody else? Or can we take 3 questions?
I have a small observation, madam, regarding the reservation. You said that it is a constitutional mandate. So no policy will speak about the reservation. But when the private university is coming to here,
For private is already there.
institutions, but they are not following the reservations.
Provisions. They are not following the constitution.
Yeah.
That's because we have a very poor regulatory system who can't put them on. They are expected to follow them. They are expected to follow that. Nobody can, even if they are private or not, they are supposed to follow the rules of the land. They cannot say that.
But it's not
That is because UGC does not have the teeth to pull them up. That is because of the poor regulatory
One
system.
more, just a small one.
Yeah, I'll start responding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me first take up what Sudha has raised. I can see where the concerns come from. I am a teacher myself. To take up your point of equity first. When I was teaching in Bombay University and we had centralized evaluation, we get our answer scripts with the names and enrollment numbers all blocked out. And when you evaluate an answer script, I know whether it is coming from Marathwada region of Maharashtra or it is coming from a South Bombay college student. The language ease with which a South Bombay student writes, with limited content but excellent power of presentation, is enough to blind any evaluator, as opposed to one coming from Marathwada who has taken enormous efforts to articulate in a foreign language. And that is what we in the Planning Commission also call as the index of disadvantage. That is how we look at the socially and economically disadvantaged group. The fact that I am a woman I'm a Muslim, adds to my double index of disadvantage. So every person adds to a certain degree, whether he is SC or ST or a differently abled person, there is an index of disadvantage. As educators, we cannot afford to be apathetic to that reality. We have to be empathetic to that, and when we evaluate also, we give them the benefit of having that index of disadvantage, whether it is single or double. An SC woman has a double index of disadvantage. ST woman, double index. A double SC is a woman plus disabled adds to three levels of disadvantage. So we need to see these aspects. Now, the fact remains that India has a lot of diversity. And India has the largest youth population also. A point that I didn't touch upon because of the limited time. India is the one which is going to provide Japan, Korea, US, entire European countries, China, Germany, all aging population. Where is the human capital going to come from? From India. And that is why the need to get them completely skilled. Your point also becomes very, very important. It's not just the intellectual soft power, but also the skilled workforce that India is likely to provide to the world. Now, in that context, we will of course feel that there is a bias, let me tell you that. The bias is that learning in English is the only way we become empowered. And I'm not diluting the power of English at all. You have to develop the abilities of individuals to communicate effectively in English language. But to assume that, let us assume for a second that right from school to college and your doctoral, we start forgetting that there is Malayalam, there is Telugu, there is Gujarati, there is Marathi, and that we will all talk to one another in our homes, in our shops, only in English language. Would you like that? I don't think so. We must always be balanced. And on one side, what Pushpa raised, AICT, NEET exams, CUET exams being conducted in regional languages and offering these professional courses in regional languages might be a disruption for us to accept for some time. It's like the Chinese, the pride they take in their language. They will not speak in any international forum in any other language than in Chinese. It's not that they don't know English. When one Chinese Prime Minister visited Mrs. Gandhi, late Mrs. Indira Gandhi, and during the festival of Holi, she said that they are sprinkling color. He said it is spraying color, not sprinkling. But otherwise, he talks only in Chinese. That is the level in which they have their pride in that language, and yet today have become the power that they have. Let us also, as very proud Indians, recognize the power of the diversity of our languages and give our children the strength of knowing both English and yet, if there is a marriage, to be able to speak in Telugu, right? So I think that pride should be there. And I'm saying that from a person who my mother wanted to teach and read and write Malayalam. And she was a school teacher, and I was never during the vacations interested in all that foreign art that was going on in Malayalam and never acquired it. A thing of regret, because language is connected to culture. If I need to understand Kathakali, or if I need to understand a good book or a good theatre in Malayalam, I should understand the nuances of Malayalam language. My conversation in Malayalam does not give that vis-a-vis my husband, who can understand and appreciate that. So I depend on the interpretation, which he says when I go for a drama, you keep your mouth shut and watch it. If you can't understand, I tell it after that. That happens because language comes for drama, for folk music, for so many things. So let us not mix up the richness of our culture, which will happen if you continuously only focus. But English has to be learned. Communicative English has to be learned. And the confidence to be able to communicate effectively has to be also taught. And that balancing has to be done. Now coming to ODL. ODL is a baby without having an actual mother, because ideally we should have had a distance education council. It was not there. And finally, it is while I was in the ministry that the split happened and DEC was taken out from my own parent institution. No, all that has happened. But it did not happen, and what we did, an existing regulatory body was asked to take it up like a group. And that is what we are seeing. Had we had that, the guidelines that we would have had would have come out with more maturity, because today when the UGC brings out the guidelines, you have the NCT there, you have the Pharmacy Council there, you would have also had the Distance Education Council there. But that in that absence of that, so AICT is a part of it. That is why no engineering college will be talking about this kind of confusion, because the AICT is a part of that UGC guidelines. All the guidelines will give you that committee. The committee will show you the representative. So we really are at a loss, having not had that kind of a regulatory body being there. And it is at the same time understandable, because you must understand, all throughout we are saying the implementer cannot be the regulator. So it was never correct that IGNOU should have been the regulator, because that's also an open university. But the point that you mentioned about the dual degrees, dual mode universities, let me tell you, it's a tragedy, because when I was teaching in Bombay University political science, the same thing that I taught over 120 working days, in 1 week I covered between 6 to 10, 4 hours only in 6 days. That entire course was covered. And the class was full, amphitheater class, having 500 students sitting across, sitting on the steps, because they're all the working students, they don't want to miss that class and they've come. But what a tragedy. What I have taught over such a long period, I from 6 to 10 non-stop, because fortunately the power of communication is something that God has blessed me with. So I can talk for 4 hours. All our faculty actually did that. For 4 hours, we took different subjects to take Directorate of Distance Education, which was that time called the correspondence education, to cover students coming from that. That dual mode is where that perception came about. That perception, I told you that distance education is secondary to face-to-face education. So here, open universities are not that, because open universities ensure that all things are in place and we offer it. But we cannot pick up a war with the dual mode, because ultimately for dual mode, one is it is a revenue source. Let us be very clear about it. Entire revenue that universities are getting through their correspondence education or distance education courses. The second is the fact that at least they are catering to the educational needs of students who cannot go to face-to-face. So we cannot pick up a war with that, because they are like our stepsisters or half-sisters or whatever we want to call them. So the dual mode and the open universities must be harmonious in their existence that we make. And you had these two, and of course, even now, your feeling of you said about the foreign universities. Did you mention that? No. So this concern, I would say, give good communication skills, ensure ODL is maintaining its quality assurance, and one thing you must always see as a positivist, as an optimist, and I am an eternal optimist, that there is always a horizon where you will reach. It may take time, but it will reach. Why? Because change is constant. This too shall pass, right? So this too shall pass. Coming to your skill development, this model, the Tata Institute of Social Sciences model of skill education, is the best in the country, and I can say it in any public forum. Why? Because they try up with the industry partners. Now, what you say, soft skills, personality development is not skill education. That's all value added. That's all more like a finishing school kind of thing. Skill courses are actually skill courses, what I taught in the health and wellness sector, in the hospitality sector, in the hotel industry sector, logistics and supply chain management, entire MSME sector. These are all related to skill management, right? Now, you must tie up with such institutions for providing the skills so that our students can do it over there, but don't dilute your strength as a center for skill development. When you enter into an MOU, you should not dilute B.R. Ambedkar Open University Center for Skill Development strength, because you should still remain that only the technical skill that is needed because they are having tie-up with industry and all that, that benefit you can enter. So enter into an MOU, but it should not be an MOU where the academia strength gets reduced. The degree is from us. They are only meeting the requirement of the skill education because they have the kind of the technical manpower, the industry tie-up and so on. Therefore, that can come. They may also say, because they will say in their certification, it should be with both. That may be difficult. Because in the MOU that you do with all institutions, the MOU cannot be one where they are also, they can, possibly you can write it there or something like that, but you cannot have a tie-up, because let us say you tie up with number of skill providers. You cannot then put all of it there behind your certificate. So the degree will be from B.R. Ambedkar Open University. These are the ones, and that can be clarified in their admission guidelines and all that, but they are only providing that. So the wording of your MOU that you do, and have a look at the UGC guidelines, transforming institutions into multidisciplinary, because we are talking about MOUs between universities also, arts and science with engineering, arts and science with agriculture. There also we are formulating, there are certain guidelines, there are certain things that we have to follow, but certification may become a problem. And that this model, I don't think they certify in tie-up with that, because they have so many industry partners, nearly 46 industry partners. So here you may also see one you mentioned, but there may be so many others. And all these skill courses have to be offered as part of your center. They are only providing the technical expertise, the industry partner, and the hands-on training and the internship part of it, which in a certain sense will help the student for the placement also. Okay, but the branding of your university should not get diluted. That is the point.
Thank you for your kind introduction, madam. Just I would like to bring to your notice that our university, we have 80% of our students are from rural background and also from Telugu background students we have. So with high gratitude, love and commitment towards the Telugu language, we, the Open University, the Center for Online and Education, and you learn about the OER, Open Education Resources, right? Yesterday we had one Avagahana Karikramam, that is awareness program of OER. Why do we need open education resources? The entire webinar is in Telugu, madam. Since we wanted to promote the OER resources in Telugu also, so we yesterday we took a pledge also to have an international conference to present the entire article, entire research article in our own language, as you said. Madam, thank you so much. Now, this is our custom to felicitate the guest who visit our university now. I request our PRO to proceed further.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, now I request Radha Krishna to propose vote of thanks.
Thank you, madam. Honorable Chief Guest, Sitharama Rao Garu, today's speaker, Dr. Shakila Shamsu, madam, dignitaries on the dais, directors, deans, heads of the department, and participants of the today lecture, a warm and graceful good afternoon, one and all. On behalf of my organizing committee, Director Siga, it is my privilege to propose a formal vote of thanks on this occasion and acknowledge the contributions of those who worked hard to make this event a successful one. At outset, I extend my wholehearted thanks to our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sitharama Rao Garu, for his constant encouragement to organize programs of this nature, for sparing his valuable time in spite of his busy schedule. Sir, you are the source of motivation and energy. Thank you once again for your blessing. My sincere thanks to Shakila Shamsu Madam, former OSD, NEP 2020, Ministry of Education, Government of India, Secretary Committee to draft NEP. Thank you, Madam, adjusting your time, your busy schedule and traveling so long to reach us and sharing your knowledge. I believe this lecture opened a new dimension. Thank you once again, ma'am. I place on my record sincere thanks to our guest of honor, Professor Pushpa Chakrabani Madam, Director Academic, Professor A.B.R. Reddy, Registrar, for the presence and giving valuable message to the audience. An event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheels started rolling back weeks ago. It requires planning and a continuous effort. We have been fortunate enough to backed by a team of very proactive and dedicated staff. I must mention my deep sense of appreciation to Finance Department, Computer Center, EMMRC, and PRO section to their efforts to making this event more accessible and excellent coverage. I thank one and all. Thank you very much.
You are representing.
Yes, Director Sika, it is. I mentioned. Ma'am, it is.